The following episode will contain spoilers. You have been warned.
You're listening to Cinema IRL, the podcast that throws you into the movie and asks the question, what would you do? Oh look, a musical biopic. We haven't seen any of those. Well, this is one that got an Oscar nod for Timothée Chalamet playing Bob Dylan in A Complete Unknown. Per usual, Amber and Scott discuss. And now, Cinema IRL.
I wish I could switch places for just one day.
What would you do?
Put yourself in my shoes.
How do we handle this?
What would you do?
Put yourself in my position.
What would you do?
Now it's your turn.
How does it feel to be on your own with no direction home, like a complete unknown? And we're not going. You said ready.
No, we are going.
We are?
Yeah. Yeah, you just didn't see the timer. I was slow in getting the other timer up.
I subjected you and everyone to listening to me sing. I'm sorry, folks. So obviously that was our hint about this episode's movie, A Complete Unknown. And this is set in the New York music scene of the early 60s. It follows 19-year-old Minnesota musician Bob Dylan's meteoric rise as a folk singer to concert halls and the top of the charts. His songs obviously becoming iconic in pop culture. And we see what his life was starting out and evolving into who he ultimately was.
Yeah, I have a feeling you knew more about him than I did. Not to say that I didn't know who Bob Dylan was, for sure I did, but
no, I didn't know anything about his backstory.
Oh.
Okay. So yeah, so the interesting thing that I really took away from this film that I thought would be interesting to dig in from a what would you do standpoint is he started off as a fan of folk music, admiring people like Woody Guthrie, and he had this great sound, but it was folk. And so he ultimately fell in with some of the right people and got to do some musical appearances. And his first album was covers of other people's music, but he wrote his own music. He was very talented, and he became very popular on the folk scene and appearing at all the folk festivals. And as he grew more popular, it was a big deal to have Bob Dylan at some of these folk festivals. And as he got more and more popular, he then made the controversial decision, that he wanted to bring electric instruments into his music.
Wow, musicians changing it up mid-career. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, and the people that had given him a leg up in the folk industry were none too happy about this crazy amplified sound idea of his. And he went on to do an album, and it had musicians, and he had a band. It wasn't just him up there singing a cappella with a harmonica. He had a band behind him, and they had electric guitars, and they had a whole different sound as he evolved the music he was interested in producing. And when he was on the roster again for the folk festival, they were very concerned that he was going to do his own thing and not play folk music, which is a folk festival. And sure enough, Bob Dylan did break the mold. He started playing all of the crazy rock and roll stuff and got booed and things thrown at him, and which leads me to the what would you do? And it's when people know you for something or someone and you try to change and people don't want you to change.
Yeah.
And this could be not just a career. It could be any part of who you are as a person or your personality or your interactions with others. People come to know you for who you are. They've decided, hey, I want this version of this person in my life for whatever reason. And if you shake it up, lots of times people are none too happy about that.
I remember Garth Brooks trying to go rock. That did not work out so well for him.
What rock song?
I don't know. Literally couldn't tell you.
I don't.
Oh yeah, no,
remember
he
him.
he actually had a phase where he tried to basically leave country and move into rock. And
Was it when he had that different name? He had a different name.
Yeah.
I don't remember that being a rock person though. Was it?
Yeah, of some form. It was definitely not country. But yeah, it failed because you're right. So
Chris Gaines. That was it. It was a fictional rock persona that he had created. Chris Gaines.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to the folk festival, like as an artist, I don't know. Yes, these are the people who gave you your start.
Well, I think, first of all, there obviously was no discussion prior because they kept trying to talk to him before the festival and he kept blowing them off. So once someone shows up and he is a draw on the lineup that people are coming to see because Bob Dylan's a great folk singer and people come there expecting to see him, then at that point, then you've got a dilemma because they're still trying to say, hey, we need to talk. What kind of music are you going to play? But at that point, people are there. And I guess that's kind of a good reason to have contracts and discussions before the day of anything, because then you lose control if you are the person trying to corral someone's personality or preferences.
Yeah, I think this could have been one of those things where the folk people kind of go to him and say, listen, like...
Well, they did multiple times.
We kind of got you to where you are. We're going to play the You Owe Us one. So we'd like you to do folk for this show. And after this show, like if you want to move on to something else and do whatever, like you don't have to come back here. We're a folk festival. So if you're not going to do folk, we don't really want you to be doing it. But given where we are with the lineup and everything, we would appreciate it as a favor back to us if you would do some of the things that got you to where you were. And then we don't have to necessarily keep going on this after this.
I agree. I would probably do something similar, but I also know in any time they tried to talk to him, he basically just didn't engage in the conversation. So you could have that same conversation with him and not really get an answer or any sort of commitment. And that's kind of how he was throughout the entire process.
Well, and I think it's more back to what you said about contracts. Like, get a contract. Like, you need to know what you're going to be doing.
Even the set list in the contract.
Yeah, like you really need that. So
have you ever encountered a time where you were some version of yourself, whether it's personality-wise or career-wise, where when all of a sudden you try to change, people push back? Because that happens a lot, especially even if you look at people who are exploring personal development and people get used to you in a certain capacity, like, oh, you know, you're always the people pleaser or the one that is the diplomat or whatever your role might be in a family dynamic or in a workplace. And then if you start to act differently, people don't know what to do with that.
yeah, it's actually kind of interesting because of where I am with fantasy football. As we've mentioned, fantasyfootballmonsters.com is my fantasy football thing. And it is satirical comedy. It's very low on the analysis. It's more about trying to make fantasy football players laugh. And it's great and all, but it's a lot of work, and I will never be taken serious in the industry as long as that's what my main thing is. So I'm getting to the point where I kind of want to be a little more serious, shy away more from the characters, and actually be Scott Gerhardt out there. And I honestly, I mean, it's not like I'm crazy known here for my other thing, but I don't know if anyone's going to give two shits about what I would have to say if I weren't making them laugh. So I guess in a way, yes.
I mean, there have been so many celebrities who started off with some sort of gimmick, and then over time that fell by the wayside. And then, you know, even the goofy comedic actor with the gimmick had somehow evolved into a serious actor.
I mean, super off the top of my head, Tom Hanks and Robin Williams.
Yeah,
both,
I thought about Robin.
Both
Yeah.
prime examples there. I'd say even Jim Carrey to a point.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. For sure.
Yeah, because comedy's easier to break into. You get your foot in the door, and like if you're a funny man, you can be a funny man, but you can't necessarily be a serious actor, or at least that's the knock on some of them. So sometimes it's just about you get your foot in the door however the hell you can, which is why his first album was just covers. He didn't want to do an album of covers.
Who are you talking about?
Bob Dylan.
Oh, okay.
But
That's what they wanted.
yeah, he knew this is how I get my foot in the door.
Yeah, and it's funny. I'm reminded of an example here that also falls into this. I used to follow this person who did decluttering, and her thing was decluttering for moms and helping moms with busy schedules declutter their house and have a more simple life. And she also infused a lot of Bible verses and speaking of faith and God into her material. And she had an extremely devoted fan base in this decluttering community that she had created. And she used some language that was really not too bright to use, but she used words of you will have, as long as there's an internet, you will have access to this community. As long as there's, web singles, you will have access to these courses, and used a lot of very definitive language when she brought people into this community. And after a couple of years, she decided she didn't want to do that anymore. She wanted to do things like Reiki and tapping and, some other frequency work and be more of a holistic type coach. And she shuttered her decluttering program, and people were very upset. And recently I kind of fell into some information where she also, after closing down the community that would be open as long as you live, she was taking down the courses and saying, you have to download the courses if you want them, because I don't do this anymore. And when she changed, not only did she change her niche from decluttering to, things like tapping and other approaches to health and well-being, she also infused a lot of cussing into her marketing and her workshops. So what before might have been a Bible verse is now, I'm blank AF with the actual words and a lot of cussing. And let me tell you, when I have seen these women who feel like she completely turned on them, she is not the same person, they feel used. They feel like they were a stepping stone to this woman's success, and they are angry.
Well, as you know, I do enjoy the occasional professional wrestling.
You do?
And so they did the first Netflix episode for WWE Raw, and near the latter part of the show, out comes Hulk Hogan. Mm-hmm. Now, you don't have to be a wrestling person to know who Hulk Hogan is.
Oh, yeah. I remember him being a thing in the 80s.
I mean, a lot of people say that wrestling wouldn't be where it is without him. I don't know if I completely agree with that, but he definitely was the major face of it during a very influential time. And he was like the uber face. He never wasn't a face when he was in WWE.
A face is a good person.
Yeah. Everyone loved him. Now, when he moved on, he did some heel work, a bad person. But when he was in WWE, he was always been a good guy. But the problem is as time went on and we saw more interviews with him where he had said things that were extraordinarily racist. And
that's no good.
He went not only MAGA, but ultra MAGA for Trump. And then he comes out to a crowd in Los Angeles. Well,
comes out on the stage. Comes out.
Don't be shocked if you get your ass booed out of there. And it shouldn't have. Just because you are who you are at one point doesn't mean you can't add things that we learned that were like, oh, we thought this guy was good. No, he's actually just a piece of shit.
Well, and that depends. I'm sure people who might not have liked him before now like him with that shift, and people who liked him before now don't like him with that shift. So I think these are all really good examples of people who have changed. And going back to the what would you do? I have to say, if I was Bob Dylan, first of all, whatever decision Bob Dylan made, obviously he is one of the most iconic musicians
in music
history. But I think, especially when you're an artistic person, you have to follow what you want to do. And he had success with the folk music, and those songs will always be part of pop culture in such an iconic way. But also, too, his new music that was after that which still stands the test of time for, 50 years later, is just as popular and just as important in pop culture. And you have to follow your creative interests when you're an artistic person.
Oh, yeah, and I have no problem with that whatsoever. I mean,
I would do that.
Everyone in this world needs to evolve in some way, shape, or form. I can't even tell you how many versions of Scott have existed over my time on this planet. It's been quite a few different versions.
Yeah, if you're not changing, you're stagnating, and there's definitely something wrong. If someone sees you at a 50th high school reunion and they say you're exactly the same, I don't necessarily see that as a compliment, because if you've been stagnant for 50 years or 30 years or 20 years or even 10 or 5, you have done nothing to challenge yourself or grow.
Yeah, but
you can still be fundamentally a good person or a fun person or a bubbly person or an athletic person. But wow, you should not be talking about your what movie was it where someone just, maybe it was a sitcom or something, where someone just keeps talking about who they used to be. So,
well, I mean, I'm
sorry, that didn't make any sense to anyone except for in my head. Sorry.
I can tell you this.
Oh, it was a Friends episode. Everything's a Friends episode.
That's great.
That's what it was.
Or
a Seinfeld episode.
I had my 15 minutes within the Pokemon card game, where I was an extremely well-known name within that community for a while. And so much to the point that 25 years later, I still will get people that will occasionally message me out of nowhere and be like, wait, are you Scott Gerhardt? Yes, I am. If I were invited to do something today as a Pokemon type thing, which I have been, I've thus far declined for various reasons, but if I were going to go to something that was Pokemon related, I'm not going to go there and chat up fantasy football.
Oh, well, of course
or
not.
other podcasts. Like, I'm going to,
of course not.
You do, like, if
we have different faces and different versions of ourselves, and that's just good common
yeah,
sense.
and
to,
even
to
though
speak
that
to the audience you're with,
even though that's not something I do anymore. I've played 2 games of Pokemon in the last probably 20 years, but yeah, I mean, when in Rome, if you're going to be at a folk festival, play folk songs. If you don't want to play folk songs, don't do a folk festival. And if he had wanted to just say, listen, I understand y'all did a lot for me. Thank you. I don't want to be viewed this way anymore. I'm not going to do the festival. That's fine as long as you haven't already committed to the festival.
Yeah, I agree. And, we were talking about the version of the movie that we saw. I certainly don't know how closely that aligns with the actual facts. But what would I do? I would, whether I was the promoter or Bob Dylan, I would have an understanding before I went out on stage or before I let someone out on stage. That's my what would I do.
Yeah, just be a damn professional. That's all we ask sometimes.
We hope you enjoyed our episode. Thank you for listening. And to catch all the new episodes, please subscribe. We release 2 to 3 episodes weekly, so we'll have new content regularly. Until next time.